Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Edmond. I am the coordinator of the KT4D project, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our webinar today on the Trust Shield, Building Democratic Resilience in the Digital Age. We still have some people filtering in, but I think I'm going to start the webinar now. And I'm going to start, let me just share my slides, by telling you a little bit about what we're looking to do today, and of course, a little bit also for those of you who don't know the KT4D project well already, about who we are and what we focus on. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. You all know this, but it's always good to be reminded that, first of all, we are recording this event, and we will be making it available on the KT for Democracy EU website afterwards, including the presentations of each speaker, so you will be able to find that. We encourage you to enter any question you may have for any of the speakers into the dedicated Q&A box placed in the lower toolbar. But you can also use the chat functionality to introduce yourself and share your own experiences, your comments, and maybe the project or institution or perspective that you're coming to for this really quite cross-disciplinary set of questions and topics. You can also follow the chat to be informed and receive links on some of the outputs that the KT4D project has produced. And just in case you're curious, I think as of this morning, we had about 145 people registered for this event, most of whom would self-identify as researchers and who come from quite a wide range of countries. So we're looking forward to a diverse and wide-ranging debate with you this afternoon. Also, just want to flag before we head into the meat of today's events that we'll be having a hybrid event face-to-face in Brussels and also available to follow online called Beyond the Algorithm, From Research to Action for Democratic Renewal. This is a conference not just of the KT4D project, but a joint conference of a consortium of projects all looking at this interface between democracy and AI and big data. So I highly encourage you, if you are available and if you're interested, to join us on the 4th of December for that. More information can be found on the KT4D website or at the site that the QR code will lead you to there. So before we go any further, you might not know much about the KT4D project. And it might just be useful for you to know that we are a project. We're nearing the end of our funded period of 3 years. And we were funded to look at the question of how rapidly changing knowledge technologies can be capitalized on to foster more inclusive civic participation in democracy. We were funded to look at AI and big data, but we prefer the term of knowledge technologies just because it allows us to look at what these technologies do, not the way they built or what they are or what people might think they are, what kind of imaginaries we might have around them. And in the course of our 3 years, we've built capacity for citizens and citizen-facing civil society organizations. We've worked toward creating regulatory tools and services for policy and CSOs, and also improving awareness of how to design and indeed use the kind of the software that's being developed in an ethical and mindful way when it comes to the way in which it encompasses democratic principles. That's just a quick look at our consortium. It's quite a broad consortium, including Trinity College Dublin, my own institution as the coordinator, and a number of partners contributing social science, humanities research, technological development, and also the perspectives of a number of civil society organizations working to safeguard democracy within Europe. So that leads me to the moment today. And we're so excited to be able to have this webinar to welcome the release of the European Democracy Shield, which I'm sure all of you have rushed right out and read. But it's really exciting to see a document like this. And I won't say too much about it because our policy officer, Alberto Domini, has been very, very kind to join us today to tell us more from his perspective about the Shield. But what's so interesting for us is, first of all, to read a document like this and see that the idea that technology should lead or that technology is at the center of trust is very far from what this document's about. And that is not always the case in some of the discussions we find ourselves in. Yet at the same time, many of the things we recognize and that the Shield recognizes as risks, the integrity of the information space, the free and fair elections, the societal resilience and citizen engagement, this whole idea of a civic tech hub, these are very much issues that are framed by our interactions with technology. So when I read the SHIELD documentation and looked at it and thought about the keywords that are important to us in KT4D, the things that came to me were critical digital literacy, which is very important to us, democracy in the loop, meaningful friction in technological systems, and of course, culture and cultural perspectives. You can learn a lot more about how we approach these on the website. But of course, more than anything else, the issue of trust became important and has come to the fore in the European Democracy Shield. And just to say a little bit, obviously, my KT4D colleagues are going to say much, much more about trust. But the idea that trust is something that we were expecting a certain kind of performance from another party, whether in terms of loyalty, goodwill, truth, or promises. And it's an easy definition to sort of absorb, but at the same time, there's a lot of implications here that are important for democracy. It's risky and it involves critical assessment. Again, critical digital literacy is one of the key things we focused on. It's not one thing. It's varied. So that you could have social trust because of a relationship with someone, or you could have epistemic trust because you have knowledge or factual experience with something. You can look at this from the perspective of the value of trust, that it is economically, socially, politically, absolutely central to the value we can build together. It is culturally and contextually dependent. And again, this is something that we've seen a lot of in our project where we have quite a wide consortium and also use cases in 4 different countries. And finally, trust is human. It's flexible. And it's not the same as what we might say functioning to specifications. And I think one of the things that we share in KT4D is just a little bit of a frustration with terminology like trustworthy technology. You don't trust your toaster. It either functions and gives you nice toast, or it doesn't function and it doesn't give you nice toast. When we start to imbue technologies with the same kind of flexibility that we view democratic institutions or societies with, then we put ourselves in the dangerous position of being led by these technologies. And that's something that we don't want to see. But of course, we want to come back now and look at this question of trust through the lens and in the context of this new development of the Democracy Shield. So I am just going to release you from my slides and now introduce you to our first speaker, Alberto Domini, who is Policy Officer for Democracy, Equality, and Culture at DGRTD, and who's going to tell us more about this new development. So, Alberto, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I think that you see me and you hear me very well. Amazing. Well, as Jennifer was saying, my name is Alberto Domini. I'm from the DG for Research and Innovation, DGRTD, which, as probably many of you know, is in charge of the programming of the Horizon Europe program, under which this project is funded. And I'm also the policy officer for KT4D and many other projects related to AI and democracy, including those that are going to be presenting on the 4th of December. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Also, just to share a few thoughts about the Shield, the European Democracy Shield, which has been very timely released and published yesterday. It's a milestone moment. At least this is what we consider from, of course, from the side of the European Commission. The Shield was mentioned a few years ago. It was 2022 at the State of the European Union at the Parliament, and then it was relaunched recently, last September. 2025, the speech of 2025, showing that the new commission, the new von der Leyen commission, also wants to continue promoting and ensuring their action in strengthening democracy. The president, I mean, just allow me to remind you about the words of the president. Said in a number of occasions that it's only by showing that democracy works for people and that delivers that we can create a stronger European Union. She also refers to the several challenges, unprecedented challenges, not only the COVID-19 crisis that she has to, I mean, all of us had to face, but also to geopolitical tensions and the rapid evolution of technology, and particularly the rise of artificial intelligence, which is clearly marking the past few years. We as the European Commission, we are very much interested in researching and investing in researches about the potential and the threats of AI. AI has certainly a transformative potential. It can make our economy smarter, also public services more efficient, and also societies and people more connected. but at the same time can be a threat to the principles, such as those that Jennifer was mentioning. So trust, truth. Let's think about the issues about information integrity and also fairness. And to protect democracy, then we must ensure that AI serves citizens, the people, and not the other way around, giving and granting way too much leverage and agency to the platforms and to the main actors, which are increasingly active in the sector. AI is, from our point of view, from the legislator point of view, not neutral, because in the wrong hands can become a real weapon of mass manipulation, of mass distraction. We see that with the emergence of the phenomenon of deepfakes, they can distort reality, algorithms can amplify content which is divisive. The proliferation of bots, fake accounts, that can suppress debate, which is democratic debate. And also we see that also AI is in use by several regimes, authoritarian regimes mostly, that use that to erode trust and also polarize their societies in their country, but also outside. There was a lot of investment recently and attention in information suppression, which is a form of foreign interference, which is also clearly using AI. We see that in a number of cases in developing countries. But speaking about also developing countries more closer to home, let's think about just the most recent example of the elections, parliamentary elections in Moldova. Sorry, in September of this year, around also of the State of the Union, in which clearly AI-generated content, also fake accounts, fake news sites linked with cyber attacks have clearly undermined democracy and also heavily influenced public opinion. So this election show how transparency, again, fact-checking is important, and also cooperations between different actors. So the researchers, as all of you, but also the platforms, the authorities, public authorities, which is crucial to protect the elections and also to make to allow citizens to make more informed decisions. Now, coming to again to the shield, this is as Jennifer was starting to introduce a strategy which is structured in three pillars, in three sections. One, which is more addressing the attempt to reinforce situational awareness. So in order to equip a broader range of stakeholders, particularly the public authorities, but not only, with tools that can be useful to detect and respond to threats in real time. And this first pillar is very much focused on, as you must have read, on the fighting disinformation and foreign interference, FIMI. A second one is more about strengthening the democratic institutions. And in this, we find all the actions and the efforts to strengthen the fairness of elections and also to support the media that should be independent and also plural. And a third one, which is more have a broader scope, which is more about boosting and improving and increasing the resilience of society through a number of actions in the field of education, of citizen engagement, and empowerment of disenfranchised and minority groups. At the center, or the heart, let's say, of this of the shield of this new communication, there is what has been also described in many articles on the press, this center, European Center for Democratic Resilience, which, as far as it stands now, the communication is going to be some sort of a hub that wants to bring together authorities from the member states, but also other European institutions, with actors from the civil society and also from the academia and from the research sector. And for us in-house at the GRTD, at the DG for Research Innovation, this is particularly important. Researchers and the academia in general will be explicitly involved in what is labeled this stakeholder platform, which should offer opportunities to valorize the evidence that they collect, that the researchers do collect, the networks and also to allow them to share the results, their intelligence, their insights, and exchange, of course, knowledge with practitioners, democracy practitioners, if we can label it like that, and also policymakers at different levels, local, national, and also, of course, EU level. And this stakeholder platform will also aim at strengthening evidence-based policymaking, particularly, as I said before, in the crucial areas of countering disinformation and FIMI, which is really at the heart of the shield. Now, going back to technology and AI, what we do believe is that one of the potential answers to the increasing and rising challenges is to use AI to fight malicious AI or the misuse of artificial intelligence. Just gonna remind you things that you know very well, what the Commission has been doing in the past, in the recent past. We know we do now have the two flagship kind of global standards for transparency and accountability, which are the AI Act and also the TSA, Digital Service Act. That both of them, they want to ensure that content which is generated by AI, including also the deep fakes, is clearly labeled as AI generated. And also especially the DSA, it wants to empower more users to better control the algorithm that rules the platform, and also somehow to make platforms more accountable. And also about AI, interestingly, under the European Democracy Shield, the Commission's announced that there are working groups that will be sooner releasing guidance on the use of AI in elections to better help political actors, but also the platforms, but also local authorities to manage all the risks coming from generative AI. And also about AI, I would like also to remind you, probably you're very well aware about past projects, not only under Horizon Europe, but also under Horizon 2020, that at the very beginning of the development of the AI technology, they started thinking on how to use technologies, particularly AI, emerging ones, to strengthen democracy, and particularly to support the debunking and the broader fight, the broader attempt to counter the misinformation and disinformation. Another initiative that is also mentioned under the Democracy Shield is another thing that you know very well, this EDMO, European Digital Media Observatory, that will continue, of course. EDMO that also I would like to remind with some pride as a policy officer at DGRTD, comes from an Horizon 2020 project, the SOMA project. So the EDMO will continue under the supervision, of course, of the colleagues at DG Connect, and also together with another initiative by our colleagues at the European Network of Fact Checkers, will also now monitor AI-driven disinformation and provide tools to the different stakeholders and different actors and members of the EDMO hubs with tools to verify AI generated content. DG Connect will also, under the Shield, always create an independent fact-checking repositories and also a platform that should be able to give to researchers access to verified data, especially data coming from the platforms. All well aware of the struggle in accessing data that the researchers, as you do have in accessing data under the Article 40 of the DSA. Something else which is also mentioned in the communication of the Shield is this new expert network on media literacy, but also other actions like civic tech hubs and also hackathons that will also try to promote and test new participatory tools for democratic engagement. From the side of the DG for Research and Innovation, another important element, I think, is the importance given to safeguarding evidence-based decision-making. More concretely, what is announced is that the Commission will adopt a recommendation in the next year on supporting the use of scientific evidence in policymaking. Actions are also envisaged to protect the freedom of research, on scientific research, and to enshrine this in EU law through a specific act in the framework of the European research area. And also, from the side also to counter foreign interference, there are ongoing efforts to create a European Center for Expertise on Research Security, which is also something that we see as an urgent matter, especially for the scientific community. Another thing is that, the European Commission again underlines the importance of research security, but also the one of integrity of academic freedom in order to ensure that there is data which is impartial, which is relevant and essential to inform policymaking. In the meantime, of course, we from my desk and from my team, we certainly going to continue to fund Horizon Europe projects in the current framework program, but also in the future under the next MFF. That will continue to fund innovations and experimentation to strengthen democracy, and we'll also try to invest more on media resilience, civic education, also media literacy, and engagement of citizens. Just to wrap up, technology is, of course, is not enough to ensure, of course, sound use of AI and of new technologies, as the third pillar of the Democracy Shield suggests. There is a real need of investing in people and in societal resilience. This is also why the Shield mentions other actions which are, in my opinion, also very relevant. So this media resilience program, as well as other initiatives to boost literacy of AI, digital literacy more broadly, in order to equip citizens with tools, with knowledge to navigate better the digital landscape, and also the creation of these civic tech hubs that wants to foster, again, democratic participation and support innovation in the digital tools. So for that, I mean, I really thank very much the project and Jennifer, particularly for organizing these webinars, because what we really see also in line with the objectives of the Shield is really to bring researchers, but also civil society, CSOs, and citizens more broadly to work together to increase resilience and to create better tools and better innovations to make sure that AI and technologies are, as I said before, serving the citizens and not the other way around. And with this, I'm going to be happy to, take any questions about the Shield and about what is cooking in the house.
Thank you so much for that, Alberto. There is clearly a lot cooking and very exciting times. I'm going to actually not take any questions now, but I'll just let you know, Alberto, there are some questions for you in the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
You can go and you can answer them, or we can hold them for the end and maybe bring them into the discussion as you like.
Should I answer in written on the chat?
If you want to, again, if you feel like
Okay.
it's
If I
meaningful, or if it's, yeah, exactly, and if you
Okay.
have the information.
Of course.
But for now, we're going to move on to the next presentation from my KT4D colleague, Tiffany Morisseau from Strain Innovation. She's going to be looking at this question of trust and democracy from a psychological perspective, including the changing conditions of social trust. So Tiffany, I will turn over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Thank you, Jennifer, for introducing me. So I'm Tiffany Morisseau. I'm a researcher in cognitive psychology. I work especially on epistemic trust and social trust as Strain Innovation and at the Université Paris-Cité in France. So in my talk today on how the conditions for social trust are evolving with AI, I will focus in two contexts in particular. First, how people consume information online, and to what extent AI is changing how we do it. And second, how the use of AI affects social trust within organizations and institutions. So first, to what extent does AI change how we relate to information online? So systems based on generative AI can produce a massive number of articles and video in an instance. And there is a legitimate worry about its impact on the way we process information and our information environment in general. So how we can trust information in this context when it is so easy to produce poor quality and sometimes manipulative content. So that's the challenge. Now, an important aspect to have in mind when we address these questions is how epistemic vigilance works, how we process information in the first place. When we evaluate a piece of information, we assess both its plausibility and the credibility of the source. But in everyday context, and especially on social media, knowing the absolute truth is not always necessary. What we do in general, what often matters instead, is to exchange interesting, socially relevant information. Those are the motivation, the main motivation online is to consume and share information to stay connected and engage with others. And as it happens, people are more vigilant when the stakes of knowing the truth are high. For instance, when someone else is involved, or when you care about the quality of your work. And in our experimental research on epistemic trust within KT4D, we compare trust in AI versus trust in human informants. And our experiments confirm the importance of context to describe to what extent people relied on ChatGPT, for instance. So in this little chart, you can see that the trust toward experts, historian, expert, medical experts, remain relatively stable regardless of the stakes. But when the stakes become higher, the trust toward AI and toward lay people, by the way, decreases significantly. So people are sensitive to the stakes of knowing the truth. Now, what AI will change? Generative AI make it easier to create more realistic content. It's very easy. According to many voices, this will also potentially translate into very problematic outcomes for people's beliefs and behaviors. Simon and his colleague, Sacha Alte and Hugo Mercier, divided these concerns into 4 categories. Increased quantity of misinformation, increased quality of misinformation, increased personalization of misinformation, and also involuntary generation of plausible but false information. When you use generative AI like ChatGPT, for instance, and then share the results of your research. But these evolutions don't mean that people will become more gullible because of AI, mostly because people are not passive receivers. People do pay attention to what they want to read, and there is already a far more low quality content online that anyone can consume. So the bottleneck is not so much the production of fake news or misinformation, but also the demand and how much people are attracted to them. So people may instead, in a noisy environment, adapt to this environment and maybe become more skeptical overall and more vigilant towards information they can find online. So the real issue is rather how can people better and more easily identify trustworthy information in the first place, rather than falling for misinformation and fake news. So where the real needs lie for trustworthy information systems? The reason why misinformation is not pervasive in the information environment of democratic countries is due to the work of professionals belonging to strong enough institutions, like journalists, for instance, which have over time developed strong norms and know-hows. So there is a real need to make sure that these institutions will remain strong enough. Also, because many people are still unaware of how easily AI can be and used by malicious actors, it may become easier indeed for malevolent actors to reach large audiences and deceive more and more people, at least for a time. And there is, of course, a need for measures to inform those citizens and protect them from these risks. Digital literacy and better systems that help people identify trustworthy information will be very much needed and will help. It can be, for instance, easily understandable signs or label put in place by institutions. So the second thing I wanted to talk about today is the question of how does AI affect trust in people, in institutions, within communities, within organizations, enterprise, and academia, for instance. So AI is increasingly used in professional settings and in our everyday lives. The question of whether is it okay to use it in a given context, in professional context, academic, artistic context also, comes up more and more often. And it changes how we value each other's contributions and competence. So we always ask ourselves, okay, is it okay to use AI for that purpose? In our experimental work with Josie Cirillo, we examine how people judge the acceptability and fairness of AI use in professional context. So participants evaluated scenarios where someone used AI to perform a task, for instance, writing a report, composing a piece of music, or preparing a job application. And the nature of the task was very important in how the use of AI was evaluated. So in this chart, you can see that on the bottom, so it's the expected personal involvement associated to the task. And you can see that the more this personal involvement was expected for this particular task, then the use of AI was associated to less trust towards the agent. And in France, a recent case illustrates how the use of AI can directly affect social trust within organizations. And in this case, for the first time in France, two branches of the biggest professional press group were ordered by a court to stop publishing AI-generated content. So it was this summer. And this case highlights the urgent need for explicit rules governing how and when AI can be used and how this use must be communicated to others. So there is really a need to harmonize and make it explicit within a community, within a company, so that people know how to use it and make it transparent both within the organizations and to the public. This tension is becoming increasingly visible. People tend to agree that using AI may be legitimate for certain tasks, but not for others. And yet these intuitions, they remain vague and not spoken out loud. So establishing explicit rules for the use of AI and the way to do it is therefore becoming a very important social issue. So to summarize, a few take-home messages. First, epistemic vigilance adapts, but it functions best with visible markers of reliability. Second, social trust will erode if expectations are unclear, and it's increasingly the case with the use of AI in our everyday life. And finally, we need institutions that sustain trust by signaling reliability and setting clear rules for AI use. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I think that that's a really good set of rules to end with. A real clear set of guidance notes for the environment as a whole. And on that note of reliability and leadership from institutions, we're going to move now to two KT4D colleagues who are going to share the session on an institutional perspective. So not from the bottom up of the individual psychological perspective, but looking from the institutions down. So we're going to have Jessica Sutherland from the University of Warwick and Saib Singh from Demos in Helsinki. So Jess, do you want to take it away with your presentation now? And then you can hand over to Saib when you're done.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. From an institutional perspective then, I thought it might be quite nice for us to go through first what trusted institutions even means and why we need it, I guess. It probably seems quite self-evident that institutions are built on and sustained by our trust in them, not just kind of governmental institutions, but also The institutions that frame our lives, so media, social media, those sorts of things. And I think there's two important messages here about what type of trust we have there. Like Jennifer was talking about in the introduction. So two important ones I think that come out here are kind of moral trust in them. So we expect them to make good and right decisions for us, and also an epistemic trust in them. So we trust them to be reliable sources of knowledge and information. And when these institutions begin to use knowledge technologies like AI, it seems that there might be a bit of a shift in our expectations of trustworthiness towards these institutions. And I think it's important there that we can kind of understand how the use of knowledge technologies, as it becomes more and more widespread, how we can kind of keep our values, our democratic values, central in these institutions. So a bit of background into the kind of research behind the role of trust in institutions. So a lot of the literature comes from Lerman, who was working in the 80s, and he described institutions as a way to reduce complexity and thereby increase trust. So, for example, we have banking institutions to reduce the complexity of sending money around the world to each other and all of the kind of issues that would come with that. And by having this institution that can do that for us, we have more trust overall in both each other and in the institution itself. It seems then that both trust and distrust are kind of bases for democracy, and so we kind of have a level of distrust, for example, in general, and then we use these institutions to increase the trust with each other. I think it's important also here to realize that trust and confidence can perhaps be kind of separate things, and it seems that sometimes our confidence in institutions can thereby increase our trust. So, for example, as Jennifer was talking about at the start, actually, we might not want to talk about trust in technologies because trust is a very kind of human-centered term. But we want to talk about confidence in technologies. So we might have confidence that our toaster will work properly for us, but we wouldn't say that we have trust in our toaster. And so I think something similar can be happening there in institutions. It seems that we have confidence that they will do certain things for us in the right ways. I'm confident that my online banking app works, for example, and I'm confident the money gets to where it's meant to be. And thereby, because I'm confident over and over again, I have a trust in my bank. So what happens then when we consider the ways that emerging knowledge technologies like AI and big data are used by these institutions? I think there's three major changes that can take place. So one comes from our epistemic authority. We see these institutions as epistemic authorities. We go for them for information and knowledge. But when they're using generative AI, like Tiffany has just been speaking about, the question then becomes who actually knows best? Are we best placed to go to these institutions or not? There also seems to be a displacement of judgment. So we delegate our judgment ourselves to the institutions, but when they're delegating then those judgments to AI, there seems to be a kind of displacement there between who we can actually trust to make these judgments. And I think this all accumulates in a kind of alienation that we might want to say comes from this black box, and the opacity of using AI can kind of change the links we have between decision making and who those decisions are made about. And so the question then becomes, what can we do without this true transparency? We don't know how these AI systems are making decisions about us, for example, and so is there truly going to be trust there in institutions? So one way that we can perhaps build this trust, even when using AI and other knowledge technologies, is through a human-centered approach. And so just as a kind of conclusion here for this very short presentation before I hand over to Sahib, I think it's interesting for us when we talk about participation and inclusion to not just think about these in terms of almost paying lip service to the people that will be involved in the decisions, but there needs to be truly an experience of how these knowledge technologies are used and a true understanding of what that means for us as consumers or customers of these institutions. And also when we can't have this kind of true explainability because we simply don't understand what's going on in the black box, it's important for us to recognise that confidence in technology does not equal the trust in technology that we think we might have. And finally, a big kind of pie in the sky one, I guess, is that we really need to align our innovation with the public good, and this public good is always in flex, whereas technologies are not. And so trying to kind of find ways that we can use these technologies in a flexible way will ultimately help us with a human-centered approach to the use of AI in institutions. So thank you, and I'll hand over to see.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can see the screen. I'll take you through slowly, but firstly, thanks very much, Jessica, Tiffany, and Alberto for the fantastic remarks so far. I'd like to focus on two dimensions. So the first dimension is on electoral interference and the European Democracy Shield. So I'm sure that many people here probably know the debate as to whether there were diluted ambitions within the Democracy Shield, and some of the political considerations around this. I think irrespective of how we speculate on that, we can see certain clear advances and non-advances in the European Democracy Shield compared to previous pieces of policy and legislation rolled out in the previous Commission. I'm going to focus perhaps on three elements here. So the first is the infrastructure that was set up, and there's a whole range of infrastructure in place in the European Democracy Shield, but there's one in particular which was announced by Madame von der Leyen, and it's the newly formed European Centre for Democratic Resilience. Whilst introduced, it's not entirely clear what the scope of the role, the place, and the financial sustainability of this particular centre currently is. At the moment, it seems to be that there is a consideration that it should be a place for voluntary cooperation. It should enable member states to come to a certain place, but it's not necessarily a centre of excellence. But the thing I wanted to point out here was that the Democracy Shield had chosen to take a cooperative approach rather than a coordinating approach. So rather than enabling coordination, mandating coordination between member states in instances of electoral interference, a somewhat softer approach was taken. This is also reflected in the voluntary commitments that were established as to what would constitute the responsible use of AI. So rather there being minimum standards that were encouraged and mandated to be developed, again, it's very much an opt-in consideration. Finally, there was an interesting piece of information and let's say basis of the report, which was the Moldova example that Alberto spoke about so eloquently. What became extremely clear in Moldova was that electoral interference, AI, security risks, and potential malfeasance were critical considerations and interlinked considerations. However, the Democracy Shield stopped short of holding elections to be critical infrastructure. Now, that may just be a phrase for some people, but from a legal point of view, that would have had serious implications on what the EU member states could or could not do in response to electoral interference. And finally, this is a point that may be familiar to many people, which is that the emphasis on misinformation and disinformation can sometimes be a case of playing guacamole and not always be a case of responding to the underlying causes of democratic decline and democratic deconsolidation. One element here, and this largely depends on how the DSA will be enforced and whether it will be enforced, when it will be enforced, and I'm aware that the Commission is under extreme pressure for this. But the extent to which we are not looking at preventing the production of misinformation, disinformation, and the extent to which they buttress the business models of certain platforms and the psychological targeting in certain platforms, which AI has radically increased. But the focus, as I said, is essentially a reactive one on identification of misinformation, disinformation, and then rapid response. The second point that I wanted to bring up here was on the relationship between AI and structural risks to participation. So there's many points that can be made here, and there's a great deal of virtue and necessity in having inclusive, democratically responsive, and open, transparent civic tech and setting standards for this. The point that I would like to focus on here is a particular shift that's occurred between democratic innovation spaces and let's say other ways of forming democratic publics. So the use of AI in and amongst democratic innovations, such as European citizens panels, such as citizens assemblies, such as mini publics, other forms of sortition. The argument here largely relies on AI helping build a degree of scale, a degree of reach, but, and this is perhaps the key point that I want to make, the focus is so heavy that it de-emphasizes rather that highly interested publics that drive politics may already exist in may exist in democracies as is. It's somewhat we can observe the fact that we don't yet have research on the way that AI is shaping existing forms of publics. So social movements, political parties, civil society, there's no research produced on this. Now, this produces a particular type of blind spot because what it does is that with this remarkable lack of understanding, there's things that happen about how we understand what constitutes collective will or collective judgment. They become snapshots in things like sortition or citizens panels rather than durable publics. So perhaps this is I'll end with more of a call than anything else. We need to start focusing exclusively on how AI might enable new forms of public formation through democratic innovations that allow us to sometimes escape the vexations and complexities of politics and start thinking about and carrying out research on how AI is feeding back into existing routes of democratic participation, how it's undermining them, if it is doing so, if it is not doing so, how is it enabling them? But I think once we do that, we'll start getting a genuine understanding on the structural risks of AI to citizen engagement and participation. Thank you.
That's really interesting, Sib. Thank you so much. And I think you're quite right that we do need a lot more research in this area. What actually is the effect when you build these platforms? Can't rush to innovation. But we're going to turn the tables now, and instead of thinking more about what happens when we innovate, we're going to take a look back at this issue of culture and culture as a lens for trust in democratic contexts. And to bring us that will be my Trinity College Dublin colleague, Eleonora Lima. So Eleonora, if you want to share your slides now.
Can you see them?
We do not see your slides.
Oh, sorry. How about now?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for all the participants in this webinar. So my presentation will discuss culture and trust in relation to AI technologies. But I want to start not from an algorithm, but with a sound. And this is a sound that is heard millions of times, for example, in Tokyo or Osaka, but almost never in Brussels or Berlin. And this is the sound of a photograph being taken on any smartphone sold in Japan. It cannot be silenced. It's not a bug or an oversight, but a deliberate design choice mandated by policy to embed a specific societal value directly into the hardware, the right to privacy in public spaces. And in other words, it is a decision to build a shield for a cultural norm right into the technology itself. And that small intrusive sound tells us a profound truth, which is technology is never neutral. It is always a cultural artifact. And indeed, when we talk about trust in AI systems and in digital technologies more in general, we are always asking questions that are deeply cultural. Who do we see as vulnerable? Who needs protection and why? Elderly people, children, marginalized communities, immigrants, people without economic power. Or what kind of harm are we most afraid of and why? Is it privacy invasion, social control, economic exploitation, loss of human judgment? However, often when a community expresses a deep-seated fear about AI, there is a tendency to dismiss it as something irrational, as bias or moral panic coming from lack of knowledge or fear of change. And this is the case, for example, of Nick Clegg, ex-Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, and until very recently, Vice President of Meta. And a couple of years ago, Clegg famously minimized the concerns around AI and compared these reactions to moral panic in the 80s over video games. And any technology claimed is first irrationally feared and then accepted. We just need to give it time. But as, for example, Amy Orban from the University of Cambridge explains, there is something deeper at work. And Orban explains, and I'm quoting, moral panics are most focused on the other, a group that does not constitute the main power holders of society. And these so-called panics, Orban observes, are rarely about protecting the powerful. They are almost always focused on protecting those in a society that a society deems vulnerable, children, the elderly, marginalized communities. So we're not witnessing necessarily rationality, but we are witnessing a rational defense of core cultural values. And we are treating instead a culture as a bug to be patched when it is in fact the operating system of human trust. And when people express intense concern about a technology, they are sending a signal about what they cherish and what they feel is under threat. Consider the public anxiety around deepfakes that we already mentioned today. A recent UK study found that over 70% of UK citizens are worried about the impact of deepfakes on elections. However, only 5.7% of respondents to this study recall being exposed to specific political deepfakes. And the same happened, as you can see from the graph here, with deepfake pornographic images, which deeply concerned many of the people interviewed for this study, especially women. However, the overall exposure remained very low. So the easy conclusion would be to call this moral panic, but perhaps wiser conclusion is to see it as a barometer of the cultural values of a specific community, a precise reading of a society's fear of losing its most vital asset, a shared reality. And the fear is not about the code, it's about the erosion of the common ground upon which democracy is built. And when we dismiss these cultural signals, we fail to design systems that foster trust. And instead, we build systems that test it, that challenge it, and that will inevitably break it. And because our cultural values are the source code for how we trust. They can be targeted with surgical precision, and this isn't a speculation. And in fact, in 2024, researchers from the University of Florida found that, for example, AI-powered phishing scams are no longer one size fits all. For instance, scams targeting older adults are often framed around reciprocity. They exploit older people tendency to want to help someone in need from their community. Instead, scams targeting younger adults are usually framed around scarcity, exploiting their ambition and fear of missing a life-changing opportunity. And this is basically the dark side of what economist Richard Thaler called nudge theory. And it is the weaponization of cultural values, and it is an architecture of deception built on an intimate understanding through the leveraging of big data of a culture's virtues. It works not because people are foolish, but because they're human and they have values and they try to be helpful, or they're trying to build a better life. But here is the crucial turn. If our cultural values can be used to build an architecture of deception, and they are through AI, they can and must also form the blueprint for an architecture of belief that leverages the same technologies. For example, if older people's sense of reciprocity can be exploited for a scam, it can also be a powerful engine for building community solidarity. If the drive for opportunity in younger people can be weaponized for a phishing link, it can also be mobilized to encourage, for example, civic engagement for increasing voters' turnout. So my point, and with this I conclude, is that if we only focus on risks and risk assessment, we might end up equating cultural values with blind spots, when instead they should be regarded as invaluable resources for negotiating our collective relationship with AI. And the challenge for democratic resilience in the digital age is not to eliminate cultural variation in trust responses, but to create spaces for these differences to inform more equitable technological futures. By treating culture as a lens rather than a bias, we can develop more nuanced, inclusive approaches to AI governance that draw on the wisdom embedded in different cultural traditions. A single definition of trustworthy AI for a world of 8 billion people is clearly destined to fail. And this is a vision that sees culture as friction to be smoothed out. Trust instead is not a universal standard to be met, but a local relationship to be built. And that's all from me. Thank you all.
Very good. Thank you so much, Eleonora. That was actually quite inspiring to think of culture as a way to lead us not just to the problems, but also to the solutions. So on that solution-oriented note, I'd now like to introduce our last speaker, Maria Ruiz de Asin de los Santos from the Fundación Cibervoluntarios, who's going to be talking about critical digital literacy as a bridge that transforms vulnerability into empowerment and knowledge into trust. Please, Maria.
Okay, can you see anything? Can you see my...
We see your editing view, not your presentation view.
What about now?
Perfect. That's it.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Maria Ruiz. I work in the Fundación Cibervoluntarios based in Spain. And I'm a social anthropologist with a background in development studies as well. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about critical digital literacy as a bridge for transforming basically vulnerability into trust. That is a little bit one of the objectives of this project with the KT4D. So, well, from now on, I'm going to be referring to critical digital literacy as CDL because I don't have much time. And also, it's a little bit hard to pronounce in English. And so, what is CDL? It's the ability to not only use and navigate the digital tools or the technologies, but also to understand and question the power relations and the cultural and social dimensions that are embedded in these technologies. So it's basically about thinking critically and acting responsibly. So in digital environments involving agency of the people and the individuals. So now I'm going to be firstly talking about the three main dimensions when it comes to studying CDL and also literacies in general. And then I'm going to be explaining the three concepts that sustain the CDL. The dimensions are firstly the cultural approach. That is not just the technical aspects of technology, but also the meaning that people make of them. Because as we know, literacies, the ability to write, to read, to understand the world around us, are about knowledge, but knowledge is not static. It's actually culturally situated. It adapts to the social and local norms. It's about how groups engage with knowledge. So, for example, take the digital activism. If you have an international social movement that reaches many countries, many regions, each region is going to probably adapt that social movement into their own set of values. So why is it important here? Because it recognizes that how people engage with technologies is actually, it follows a cultural framework. And there's not only a way to understand and use technologies. It kind of follows the same path, not exactly, but that Eleonora was talking about. But instead of culture or the lens for trust, it's culture or the lens for digital engagement or the use of technologies, right? So the second one is the social political arenas. Why is it important? Because literacies are connected to power relations embedded in social systems, where we can find inequalities such as gender inequality, age, even access to resources, in this case, for example, technologies. And these power relations determine who gets to speak, who gets heard, and who gets excluded. That's the main point here, because it can lead to both the empowerment of social groups or individuals, or the oppression and exclusion of the other ones. So why is it important here? Because in this digital age that with already pre-existing inequalities, these now include the digital ones of access and control over technology. So the CDL basically would allow us to see and to question power structures embedded in these technologies. And third, we have pedagogy. That is about how we teach and we learn literacies that often already serve like certain values and core values, dominant cultural values as well. And it's important because we can see actually what interests these values serve and who is behind the control of technologies. So what does it mean to be critically literate? It means to be able to know how a digital system works and also what they do, but also who benefits from them and who suffers these exclusions, but also challenges cultural hegemonies, to be able to see who is in control and who gets to exclude others. And also, I think one of the most important ones is that it encourages civic participation by allowing people to be aware of what they are using and how they can change their behaviors.
I'm sorry, Maria, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Is
Yeah.
it possible, can you move your microphone a little closer to your mouth and maybe speak a bit louder? There's a huge
Yeah.
amount of noise in the background for you,
I'm so
and people are
sorry.
having a hard time hearing you.
I'm so sorry. Okay. Is it better now?
I think if you speak up, we might hear you a bit better. Thanks.
Okay, I'll try. Is this better? I don't want to shout because everyone else is working.
Yes, I think that's better.
Okay, perfect. I'll try to speak louder. Okay, and then we have these the three concepts that I told you about that are actually the sustained CDL. The first one is the root of CDL awareness, the ability to reflect on our own relationship with digital systems. That implies actually situating oneself socially and be able to recognize one's role in digital systems and power structures. So who we are, where do we stand, what can we do with what we have, or what can we change with what we have. And it makes us also understand how technologies shape cognition and behavior. It's all about agency and being able to differentiate and act on what we know. And I like this sentence because it says it transforms users into critical citizens, which I think is one of the objectives of this project in general. And then we have vulnerability and trust. Vulnerability is being exposed to risk, manipulation, bias, and inequalities, as we said before, from engaging in digital systems. And trust, it also involves vulnerability, but it's kind of accepting that vulnerability, except based on positive outcomes, as Jennifer said before, expecting a good performance from a third party. And how to achieve this is by turning this vulnerability into trust means getting to that awareness that I said before that can be achieved through education and literacy. Okay, and well, okay, 7 minutes. Okay, so the project K24D developed in the aim of reaching this critical digital literacy and giving the tools to understand digital systems and be aware of how they work and who they serve, who they benefit, who they exclude. K24D developed these games to empower people. This kind of educational platforms. The first one is a serious game that is the biggest one. Okay, that it's about governance, ethical dilemmas when it comes to artificial intelligence, decision making in governance. So people start getting used to these concepts and terms of critical digital literacy. And then we have the algorithm and deepfakes explainers that are a little bit more interactive, but they also shed light on preoccupations that people have when it comes to new digital tools they don't really understand. And so as a conclusion, critical digital literacy is a civic competence. It's about understanding the complex relationships between technology, society, and power. And it teaches us to be aware of how digital systems shape our lives, recognize vulnerability as something that can be managed and solved by awareness, to lead it into trust and build trust on the basis of understanding and transparency. So it transforms the digital citizen from a passive consumer into an active participant. And awareness turns vulnerability into empowerment and trust into a democratic resource.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Maria. What a fascinating perspective. We have a few minutes, and I see that we have one question coming from the audience, specifically for Maria. And the question asks, and I'll just reiterate it here, Maria, so you can address it, that when you consider the cultural linguistic differences in rapidly changing technology, how can we provide these critical digital literacies to people? Because the technologies are different, the softwares are different, the cultures are different, as Eleonora would have pointed out. We can do all this in theory, but how do we do that in practice?
You mean the linguistic translation of the resources and tools?
It's more about providing literacies, I think, across these kind of cultural barriers, but maybe translation has a part to do with it.
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting that question because that's actually what we are doing with our games, right? Our games are being translated into different languages, and it's not only about the linguistic translation that is important, but we've tried to do these validations in different parts of the world, and what is most important is to take into account also the partic particularities of each cultural group and also embed them in those tools in a way that it recognizes that people are different. And that is, in my opinion, to achieve that is through I don't know, qualitative research, be there to be able to collect those little data, qualitative and social data that maybe technologies I'm not sure, but maybe they're not ready to do as for now.
Mm.
So that's my take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's been fascinating to see in the use cases of KT4D is the way in which trust can predicate the best tools for acquiring critical digital literacy. So that's another thing that we can kind of offer from this project. But I wanted to come back. I don't see any other questions from the audience, but I have a few of my own, of course, and that's the best thing about being the chair. And I wanted to kind of turn to Sahib about your presentation, because obviously we are thinking today specifically about the European Democracy Shield. And I'm actually, a couple of people have either in the chat or in the questions sort of broached the question of, well, what's new here? There are platforms and there are mechanisms, and there is obviously a recognition of mis and disinformation. So can you say anything? I mean, how is this significant progress from the measures implemented, in previous commissions and in previous framework programs? What's new?
Thanks, Jennifer. So I think there's a useful way that at least that I'm looking at not only this document, but the way that at least the people that I've spoken to and interviewed in the commission have sort of addressed this sort of stuff, which is the foundations were laid down in the previous commission. Our job now is to operationalize everything and to get it going. And that applies both to citizen engagement elements, and it applies to the basis of the European Commission's approach to disinformation and misinformation. I actually don't think there is anything radically new on the premises of the approach and the main assumptions. I think some of the technical ways in which the Commission has approach the issues, that differs a little bit. So it's the first time where I've read a commission document that actually takes a systems approach to democratic problems. The first sentence of that document links it to a whole range of priorities that the commissions has. The four main priorities actually that von der Leyen laid out when she started the new commission last year. So I think there's continuity, and I think that there is small differences, and those differences come mainly through the operationalization. I was very pleased to see the extent to which citizen engagement and the approach to innovations was taken. It's a little bit vague still, but I think that's just the nature of the field at this point. I don't think the epistemic basis has really changed. And by that, I mean the idea that if we give citizens the right form of knowledge, they will become better citizens and make the right decisions. That rational epistemology hasn't really changed in the last 4 or 5 years of the Commission. And I don't think it necessarily will. And I also don't think the other thing that hasn't changed is a real reckoning of power dynamics. And I think that will come about when we sort of speak about the enforcement of the DSA. And I believe that the French government is putting increasing pressure on the Commission to actually release some of its initial findings and implementations.
Absolutely.
Sorry, that was a very long answer, but
it is. And I think actually it would be very useful, maybe Alberto, to give the last word to you to kind of respond to what Sahib has just said, is in terms of a sort of an outsider's view of how the Commission is trying to progress what's happened in previous years. How do you see this question of the real core of the Democracy Shield?
Certainly, you were right in saying that this is an attempt to bring together actions and programs which are already enacted in a way, they're already started, and things that have been already announced in the recent past. There is certainly an intention to give more sense to all of these actions, and also most importantly to connect different services, to try to have different not only institutions but also parts of, from the side of the GRTD, also other DGs or other bodies of the Commission working together and sharing information and create some clarity, not only for the external stakeholders but also for ourselves, to better respond to increasing threats. Because indeed, when it comes to hybrid threats, let's use this broader label in which, of course, we find FIMI and disinformation. We cannot afford to lose any extra time and any extra energy and funding because of internal poor resource management. Let's put it like this. So it's certainly a good attempt to bring some clarity, and of course to double down on the commitment of this second order line commission in strengthening democracy in the face of mostly external, but also internal disinformation threats, which are posed by AI, but not only, of course.
Absolutely. I think they're not created by technology, but certainly the technology has a tendency to be able to enhance the threats when they are there, if it is being used for that. I'm sorry to say it, there are so many more questions I'd like to ask of the panelists, but they're going to have to wait for another time because I see we're at the end of our session. So I just want to thank all of our panelists and all of our participants for joining us here today. I'm sure that there will be a lot more discussion about the Democracy Shield and what it means for trust and what it means for democracy and what it means for Europe, but those are going to have to wait for another day. So thank you very, very much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.